Well, welcome to our first Testimony Tuesday. I'm really excited that I'm going to be able to present some of the stories from people in our church and our staff, just of the goodness and faithfulness of God and His provision, His healing, or maybe He's just teaching us something, which is definitely my story today. We would really love to have your participation in this. So if you have got a story of God's faithfulness, of coming through for you in some way, it doesn't have to be related to the specific times we're in right now. It could be just something over your lifetime that God has done. And surely there are plenty of stories out there like that. We would love for you to email them in so that I can read them out. And it's just a great way of being able to encourage people about what God has done, because it really builds our faith for what God is going to do, that He's always faithful, He always provides. And so this is what we want to do with Testimony Tuesdays. So I'm going to start this morning with sharing a story that happened very recently for me. And my story is not actually a big story about what God has done, but it definitely was a bit of a correctional story in terms of what God had said to me. And I was able to be a provision to somebody else because of the way God placed me and, again, His correction. Sometimes we need to be open to what He's going to say to us, eh? So really it was an example of God reminding me how our inconveniences can actually be His opportunities. So on Monday, before the lockdown, I had to do a few errands, get some things sorted. So I popped along on Rickson Road to the bargain chemist to pick up a prescription for my lovely mother-in-law. Only I wasn't the only one to have thought that that was a good idea. So when I turned up, there were just lines from the back door out into the car park, and there was one line on one side that had people who had already given their prescriptions in and were waiting, and then there was the line that I was in on the other side, which we were just waiting for somebody to come and talk to us. So quite a long line out into the car park. And I'll be honest, I was already in that mode of I just want to get home, I want to see my kids, get things sorted out. We had a lot to do, and so I got into line, and I admit I might have just sent a couple of texts to my husband and my mother-in-law with a photo of the line, just sort of having a bit of a whinge. But anyway, I decided I'd stick it out and see how fast the line went. So while standing there, I couldn't help but notice that there was a woman and her child that were on the other side, which means that they had already given their prescription in. And she seemed to be, I guess I'd say she seemed to be quite anxious, quite agitated, and clearly she'd been there for quite a long time to have gotten to that stage. So as I stood in line, as we slowly moved forward, I noticed that everybody that was lined up behind her, that had come after her, were getting their prescriptions and leaving. And every time she just sighed and kind of shifted her feet. Her little boy that was with her was playing on her phone, and he had clearly had enough as well. Then I got basically to the front of the line where I was now waiting for my prescription. So I moved over to the other side and I stood with her and I said, "How are you going?" Knowing that she obviously wasn't doing too well. And she just poured out with just her frustration. She said, "I have been here for an hour and a half and watching everybody else get their prescriptions and go." And I said, "Oh, well, why is that? Have you talked to somebody?" And she said, "I have given my name 3 times. Every time someone comes out, I ask and they say, 'We'll come back to you, we'll come back to you.'" And she said, I rang yesterday, I texted this morning, so I'm not sure why this is a problem." And I said, "Oh, look, let me fight on your behalf. Next time they come out, I'll really push it." Because I'd been standing there watching her and seeing her waiting, and I felt for her poor kid who was just playing his game on the phone. So next time a lady came out, I said, "Look, excuse me, this woman has been waiting for over an hour and a half and people are coming and going and she still hasn't received her medication. Can you please check where it is?" So she went inside. Well, I think just the act of standing on somebody's behalf, for her, it just seemed to be such a big deal that she wasn't alone in the situation. So she kind of just opened up to me and she said, "Look, I actually ran out of my antipsychotic medication yesterday." She said, "I really need this medication, particularly as we're going into lockdown and I've got 4 weeks with my son." She said, "I've just had some medical procedures and I have to get this medication." And so I talked to her a little about that. I talked to her about her fears and anxiety, about her responses to the antipsychotic medication. And she said to me, "Oh, you seem to know a little bit about this kind of stuff. Like, why is that?" And I said, "Oh, well, actually, I'm a pastor of a church. And so we work with lots of people, all different walks of life, going through all sorts of different things. So yes, I have worked with people who have been on this medication before." And for her, it just seemed like a big relief that she was talking to somebody who understood. And she said, "Oh, what church is it?" And I said, "It's Life Church. Do you know the Levita Centre in Upper Riccarton?" And she said, "Yeah, I do know it." And I said, "Oh, that's where we are." And she said, "Oh, well, actually, I go to the Sikh temple with my son." And she said, "I've just come from there. Actually, I was there yesterday, and we were preparing food for people, and I'm a little bit nervous about, the fact that I've been in contact with a lot of people." And so as we just continued to talk, and I helped her son play this little word game on his phone, and he was just keeping him entertained. Again, more prescriptions got called out, and it wasn't her. And it got to the point where I could see she was on the verge of tears. And she said, "I just want to go home." And I said, "I understand." And I said to her, "I'm not going to leave here, even though I really wanted to go home myself. I'm not going to leave here until you have your medication." And you just saw the burden lift off her shoulders because somebody was going to stay with her. So anyway, this is not a big story about how great I am, by the way, because let me preface it with the fact that all I was doing was whinging and complaining about having to stand in line for a long time. So no saint here. Anyway, another pharmacist came out to give prescriptions out. Again, it wasn't her. And I went up to him and I said, "Look, this is getting ridiculous." I said, "This lady needs her antipsychotic medication. She is taking her son home, and I'm not leaving here." Got bossy. "I'm not leaving here until she gets it. You need to go and sort it out urgently." And so anyway, he went inside, he came back out, and he called us into the pharmacy. Well, he called her into the pharmacy, and I thought, finally, they've got her medication. And I said to her, "Would you like me to come in with you?" And she said, "Oh, but you need to go." And I said, No, I can come in with you." So we walked into the pharmacy with her and her boy, and she grabbed a couple of things from the shelf that she needed as well. And as she went to pay for it, I just popped my pay wave in front of her. I really felt God prompt me to just pay for the medication, just make her day a bit easier. So I did that. And as I did that, she just burst into tears. She just fell apart in the middle of the chemist. And she said, "Oh, I didn't tell you. I didn't want to put." She said, "Oh, I didn't want you to do this. You didn't need to do this." And I said, No. I really felt like God wants you to know that He loves you and He cares for you and He sees you." And she just, again, cried and cried and cried. And she said, "My benefit got cut last week, and I didn't even know how I was going to pay for this. I was going to have to put it on my credit card, and I had no way to pay it back." And then her little boy looked up at her and said, "Mum, why are you crying?" And she said, "Because this lady just helped us." And he said, "Oh, so they're tears of joy." And I thought, oh, how beautiful is that? So anyway, got her stuff and left, and we walked out into the car park, and she was still crying, and got to have a chat to her son. I said, "Look, if you need anything," explained to her again the name of the church and that she could find us online and message us and that we could help her. And I walked away I felt good that I was able to help. But I just felt reminded that often the situations we're in, where we can be complaining because it's inconvenient, or we can't really see that God is in the midst of it, He is always there, and He's always wanting to bless His children. And she was God's daughter, and that boy was God's son, and He wanted to provide for them. He wanted to help them in their time of distress. And I think, how often do we miss the opportunity to step in and be God's hands and feet? We've been talking a lot about how can we let our light shine in a time like this. So I want to encourage you. I know we're all kind of locked down at home, but we still have to go to the supermarket occasionally, and we still have to see people in those opportunities. Maybe you're in essential services. Maybe you're in the healthcare front lines. This is our chance to be the church wherever we are, to show kindness, to show God's love, to be a blessing to others, to be positive and not negative, to carry God's peace and hope in every situation. So you may not be able to do that by leaving the house, but maybe you can do that online. Maybe you can do that in your connections with people every day, even with your family and your kids when it can seem inconvenient and frustrating and you've had enough. Just remind yourself that God is at work in and through us. So that's my little testimony of what God taught me this week. But I also wanted to share that we received an email from Margaret Armstrong, whose granddaughter was in Orlando and she was trying to get home before the lockdown. And to be honest, flights were looking impossible. She was able to get one flight, but then not another connecting flight. And so Margaret got a couple of her friends praying. Now, her granddaughter is not really a church-going person, so it was a great opportunity for Margaret and to get these people praying and to really believe for a provision as a witness to her granddaughter. So I think that's really cool. So they prayed, and it was a provision that she got a seat at the last minute and managed to get home and to Nelson to self-isolate. And the greater miracle is that she is healthy and doing really well. So just love to hear that people are standing in the gap and praying. So good on you, Margaret. That was really great to hear. So remember, God moves in the big and the miraculous, and he moves in the small and those faithful moments. So we really want to hear all kinds of stories come in. We're going to use these opportunities on a Tuesday to share some of what God is doing. It doesn't have to be related to this situation we're in. I want to hear stories of how God has healed you from something. I want to hear how maybe God's provided for you in a miraculous way. I want to hear how maybe you just encountered God in a fresh and special way. Maybe God spoke to you about something. He promised you something and it came through. Whatever it is, we would love to hear from you. We want to be able to be a beacon of hope in dark times. And I think talking of the goodness and faithfulness of God is one way that we can do that. So look forward to talking to you next week.